If everything comes from God's hand, then I have no reason to be proud about what I have. And if I don't have as much as somebody else, I've got no reason to be jealous, because it's the same God that gave me what he gave me, gave them what he gave them. Unless, of course, they're a bunch of crooks, which is another question altogether. So we regard it as untrust from the Lord, and we use it in that way. 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 9. Look at what Peter says concerning hospitality. Turn to it. Offer hospitality to one another. That's fine. Without grumbling. That's not so fine. Why do you put that in? The Joneses are coming this weekend. Oh, no. Friday evening, 7:30. Mr. Oh No goes to the door. Oh, hello, Mr. Jones. Delighted to see you. Glad to have you in our home. Step this way. Make yourself at home. His wife's in the kitchen going, stinking hypocrite. It's one thing to offer hospitality. That's easy enough. We can do the things. You can do it with the coffee, whatever you want to do. But you see, the Word of God goes underneath. Goes underneath. Says, offer hospitality without grumbling. Phillips paraphrases it, offer hospitality without secretly wishing that you didn't have to. Now it's getting even worse. Because now our motives are in play. Oh, we really need to have so-and-so over. Why? I don't know why. I mean, they had us over. I mean, isn't that what you do? That's not it. And you know what? Hospitality doesn't have to do with whether you've got matching napkins and whether every minute particle of dust has disappeared from every square inch of your carpet. Ladies. All right, so we don't do a lot of housework, but boy, we do plenty on those occasions, you know. I saw a grain of dust. Get it? Why? Do you want everyone to think that your house is that clean all the time? Come on! So there's a distinction between hospitality and putting on a show, right? We ought to go knock one another's doors more often than we do. So what if it isn't the done thing? Let's go knock a few doors, hey? Take one another by surprise. Let's try the 1 Peter 4:9 syndrome, huh? Who said you had to get invited into your brother's house? Who said you had to get invited into your sister's home? I love my sister with all my heart. I think I get on a plane right now and I'll be in her house within 10 or 12 hours. If she's not there, I'll crawl in through the garage and I'll get in. I may even go to bed before she shows up. And she comes home and she finds me in bed. She'll haul me out, make me some tea, and we'll just have a grand time. Why? Because she's my sister. Well, did we get born into a family or what? Hospitality. Little children, 1 John 3:18, little children, let's stop saying we love people. And let's really love them and show it by our actions. You show me a church family where there is a commitment to mutual care, and I'll show you a church family that is effective. Sixthly, worship. I'm not going to say a lot about this. You had a message on this from one of our pastoral team while I was gone. Listening to all those tapes at the moment and getting blessed. Verse 43, Living Bible paraphrases it, a deep sense of awe was on them all. Verse 47, they're described as praising God. A deep sense of awe was in their hearts and praise was on their lips. They were looking up in worship. You know, you could take Acts 2:42 to 47 and you could put a template over it in a number of ways. You could talk about the upward dimension, the outward dimension, and the inward dimension. And you could look at the various facets of the family of God and say, well, where are the inward elements being catered to? Where are the outward elements being addressed? And what of the upward dimension of it all? And here we discover again that when the upward dimension of God's people, in looking up in genuine praise and in a real desire for God to come and bless, it begins to take hold, then the outward and the inward follow through. I know that many of you have gone and visited the cathedrals of Europe. And what an amazing experience that is. As you walk into those places, it's almost as if, as you walk in, someone had attached a cord to the back of your neck. And as soon as you walk in, they jerk the cord. Because inevitably people walk in and you see them and they do this. They're drawn up. That wasn't chance in the architecture. That was design. And it came from architects who understood this. Namely, that God's people are called to the upward gaze. That Colossians 3 needs to take place. Since then you have been raised with Christ. Set your hearts on things that are above and not on earthly things. Get your gaze up. And so it is that when we come together in worship, we need to come in reverence. You see, a deep sense of awe was on them all. That doesn't necessarily mean silence, but it does mean reverence. I used to go to a church in Yorkshire after we moved to England. I went on Sunday nights. And there it was. You went there and they had seats like these, but they made a dreadful noise when they clanked down. And it was almost as if people were clanking them up and down deliberately before ever the worship began. And I remember to one poor gentleman who also played the organ, who was also a dentist. I just happen to remember those unrelated facts. For whatever reason, the leadership gave him the job of coming in and quelling the riots so that worship could begin. And I used to love it as a kid. I mean, you couldn't, if the Third World War had broken out, I swear no one would have known in that building. The noise was so unbelievable. And yet to this poor soul, they gave him the job. He used to have to walk out cold and find a way to silence it all down. And he did everything except bring a klaxon into the pulpit with him. Every trick of the trade he employed. But it was useless, because it was an affair of the individual heart. And I recognize, that's why I don't want to overstate this morning, because there are some unique factors involved in this in our church family. I recognize that Sunday school, with 15 minutes to move around and everything else, does not provide for as many opportunities to say hi and to talk and to do all those things. And that's a practical consideration that we must constantly be prepared to address. And so I know that we want to share with one another and do all those things. But I want to suggest to you that even if it's only 60 seconds before we actually corporately lift our gaze upwards, why don't you become an initiative taker with the person next to you and say, hey, let's talk at the end. We're about to turn our gaze collectively to God. Why don't we take a moment and turn our hearts personally towards Him in prayer? If you would do that, then that would be one. And so it would continue. And so there would be that spirit of expectancy in worship, which would mark our coming together. And when God's people lay hold of this, then God will be in what they do, and the Holy Spirit will be in their singing. And finally, the seventh mark is that of continuous evangelism. Continuous evangelism. That this was taking place is obviously clear, because we're told at the very end of the passage that the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. Or was this happening in a vacuum? No, it didn't happen in a vacuum. I don't believe it happens anywhere in a vacuum. God, of course, could and can and does sometimes drop in, as it were, in isolation upon a life. But the pattern that He has established is that He would work through those who are in tune and in touch with Him. And so we can only but believe amongst the 3,000 as they gathered in a spirit of praise and worship, they scattered in a spirit of evangelism. And ladies talked with one another, and they drank the equivalent of a cup of coffee together, or they spoke on their way to a venture together. And someone asked, what is it about your life? And they told them of Jesus. And someone went over to the other person's yard and helped them dig out a huge stone so that they might make it possible for access or something. And as they were digging out